by God. He is the one who has opened the doors for you. He is the one who provides for all your needs. He is the one who gives you your stuff. Everything that you own, He has given it to you. Whether it's big or small, it doesn't make a difference. Everything that you own has been given to you by God. So we don't have to feel guilty, folks, for having our stuff. It's when our stuff has us is when we better start looking at our hearts. And we learned last week that generosity is not natural for us. Our natural tendency is to keep our stuff and our money to ourselves. Just watch kids. Like we talked about last week. If you watch kids, when they get their stuff, what do they don't want to do? Share it. Well, I just got it. It's a gift. It's my gift. It's mine, and I'm not going to share it. But what do we as parents and grandparents teach them to do? Share it. That's the important thing to do. You got this toy. You got this. You need to share it. You need to be kind to them. So, as we don't practice generosity. We have to be taught how to be generous. And some people have the spiritual gift of giving. They just give generously all the time. That's a spiritual gift. But those of us who don't have that gift, I don't have that gift. So boy, I have to practice generosity. I have to be taught how to be generous. I have to listen to others. Like I did this past week, listen to other pastors teach me about what it means to be generous and teach me about what it means to connect with the community. We like children, like we teach our children to be generous and we teach our children to share. Boy, we need to be taught to be doing the same thing. And you think, well, I'm an adult. I get it. I get what it means to share. I would challenge that and say, boy, how often do you practice that? Because everything you own was given to you by God. And the people in the first century understood that their stuff wasn't their stuff. Their stuff was given to them by God. And the only rights they had to it was to use it to make more and better disciples. That was the only right they had to have it. That was their only right. And they used it. And, like I said, they would use their gifts. They would use their resources. They would go into pagan nations. They would care for their sick when they were abandoned. They were living out the word. Boy, Jesus said, I will never abandon you, leave you, or forsake you. Well, the Christians took that personally, went in and cared for pagan people who had no idea who Christ was, and they risked their own lives, they risked their own resources, and they gave generously, not only to themselves, but to those around them, and they did it in the context of the church. They were a church. And so we need to understand that. Boy, the way the world is going to be changed, I'm convinced, boy, it's through the generosity of those who say they follow Christ. If you follow Christ and you're stingy, everything I read say, if that's you, then you have a spiritual problem. I didn't say that. All those other really smart people that I read about say that. So generosity is not something we have to do. Generosity it's a way of life that turns our greed into gratitude, like we learned last week, our selfishness into salvation, and our self-centeredness into sacrifice. And as we learned, generosity changed the world in the first century, and it can change the world in the 21st century. Church, do you believe that? Because if we don't believe that, we are wasting our time. We are wasting our time. Because that's why we exist. And that's why we have the stuff that we have, whether it be great or small. We are used at, like the first century church, we can copy their behavior in that, boy, they were generous to those around them. And boy, and that was the beginning. And as we read last week, boy, and the faith, Christianity spread like wildfire. And folks, I believe the same is true today. And I think it's a lot where we miss it a lot in the 21st century church. It's my church, my stuff, my this. You can go on and on and on. No, boy, God has given you everything you own. Well, today we're going to be looking at several scriptures, so I don't have just one. You'll see them as they come up. But all of them will be used to answer the question, why does giving matter? Why do we as followers of Christ need to give? And before we answer that question, we need to take a quick examination of why giving doesn't matter to some people. Well, in 2005, just a few years ago, Barna Research Group, big group that does a lot of research of Christians and the Christian community, and the director, George Barna, said why people don't give anymore is influenced by the following factors. Well, number one, some people lack the motivation to give away their hard-earned money because the church has failed to provide a compelling vision for how the money will make a difference in the world. Number two, some see their giving as leverage on the future. They withhold money from the church because they do not see a sufficient return on their investment. Number three, some people, they don't realize the church needs their money to be effective. Their church has done an inadequate job of asking for money, so people remain oblivious to the church's expectations and potential. We're dealing with that today. Others are ignorant of what the Bible teaches about our responsibility to apply God's resources in ways that affect lives. And number five, the final category, contains those who are just selfish. They figure they worked hard for the money. It's theirs to use as they please. Their priorities revolve around their personal needs and desires. And folks, this research, this was done in Christian communities. These aren't people outside of the church. These are people within the church, within the Christian community. So those that aren't believers or followers of Christ, wow, boy, you don't expect them to give. But these statistics I just read, these 5 factors, the whole research was done in Christian communities. And I also believe there are some myths that many people believe which hinder our understanding of why giving matters. Myth number one, I believe, you're giving to the church. That's a myth. You're not giving to the church. Malachi 3:10 reminds us that the church is just a storehouse. That's all it is. We receive an offering, as we have done, and we invest the offering that we take in the life of the church and the community. That's what that video was going to show you, because that video shows exactly what we do with our money. We receive the offering, and we invest the offering and your tithe into the life of the church and to the life of the community. Myth number 2, you're giving to the pastor. Folks, I don't even see the money. Your pastor and your staff are just the facilitators of the offerings received. And if you look back at the Old Testament, you would discover the tribe of Levi was responsible for the temple. They were responsible for taking care of it, and they were responsible for the things that happened in it. And the other tribes gave a tenth to them so that they could solely focus on the temple. The other 11 tribes gave a tenth of everything they had to the tribe of Levi so they could live and function. And our giving here helps us to focus solely on the mission, which is to make more and better disciples, as you can see over there, and also to see lives transformed. Myth number 3, I mentioned it last week. Myth number 3 that we have is that you are giving back to God. I argue you don't. Because last week we learned that God needs nothing from us. God needs absolutely nothing from us. The church in the first century never looked at their stuff as their stuff. They knew it didn't belong to them. That is why they could be so generous to each other and to the pagans around them. And when you give, you're giving to invest it back in others. When you give, you are investing in making more and better disciples. When you give, you're investing in lives being transformed. Do you see who you're giving to? Because God doesn't need it. Who you're giving it to? You're giving it to the people who we have yet to meet. You're giving it to people who we have yet to introduce Christ to. But, we saw some, last year, we had quite a pretty cool response from the church, in these block parties we were doing, getting to know our community, letting them know that we're here, making our church aware, hey, we are here. We want to love, we want to care for you. And that's what I mean by investing in them. And we think, boy, we're giving it back to God. Well, the scriptures teach us if you give to the least of these, you are giving to him. So I guess if you want to argue with that, you could. But really, it's all invested back into people. Everything that you give. But here are the biblical truths of why giving matters. And I don't know if you remember me saying this. This is quite a long while. But there are more scriptures about your money than anything else. Did you know that? There are more scriptures about your money and what you do with it than anything else. Jesus talks about that. Read the Gospels from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Just read 4. And you will read more references to about money and about your stuff than any other thing. I wonder why Jesus talked a lot about it. Because he knew it would be a big deal. And it was a big deal during the New Testament time because people were locked into their stuff. They were locked, in, to owning their stuff. They were locked into prosperity. They were locked in, and it goes on. And boy, he knew it, and he knew it. He knew 21st century that it wasn't going to change. And so he gave us a lot to think about through those 2,000 some verses throughout the New Testament. But mainly, if you look through the Gospels, look at what Jesus talks about. Because he knows where our treasure is. Doesn't he? He knows your heart. Because he doesn't look at the outward appearance. He doesn't look at our stuff. He doesn't look at the stuff we own or the stuff we want to own. He doesn't look at that stuff. All he looks at is our heart. And he knows what we treasure. But giving matters this morning because it shows that we recognize he is truly the Lord of our lives. That's why we give. Because when you give an offering or when you tithe, he is, or you do both, that we recognize him as truly the Lord of our lives. James 1:17 says, whatever is good and perfect comes down from us, from our God of our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. We recognize him as the Lord of our lives, and we recognize him as the Lord of our stuff. And we use that stuff for kingdom purposes. And we need to be reminded everything we have, as I said at the very beginning, everything we have, our house, the cars, job, income, clothes, the countless other stuff we own was given to us by God, all of it. And every good thing you have comes down from God the Father. Everything. And everything is 100%. But it's our longing for more stuff and more status and our longing for more security that allows our stuff, this stuff, to become Lord. And folks, we all know, if you've been here any length of time, or you've read any amount of scriptures, or if it's the first time, hear this: that longing can never be satisfied. No thing and no one can satisfy those deep longings. So, we think our stuff is the problem. Our stuff is not the problem. The things we own is not the problem. It is when our stuff controls us emotionally and spiritually is when the problem begins. I mean, look at your kids. Look at our grandkids. Look at any kid that you know. Children like their stuff, and we give them more of it. And they get what? If you give them a lot of stuff, what do they get? Spoiled. Right? They get spoiled. If we give them a lot of stuff. Maybe not your kid. Maybe your kid is the exception. I don't know. But when they get their stuff and they want more stuff and they want more stuff and they get this sense that they are entitled to more stuff. I'll never forget my mom. First grandchild. Oh, my stars. You want to talk about going overboard? Imagine between this window and this window, 4 foot high, all presents. Yeah. I remind her of that. She never did that for me. I never understood why. You know? But she did. I'll never forget it. Was my dad happy? No, not really. You know? But kids like their stuff. And when you get stuff, you want more stuff. You know that commercial you see with the cell phones? You know, boy, they say, oh, man, look at their cell phone. And some of us like, yeah, their cell phone is better than mine. You know, and some people fall into that trap. And boy, and when they don't get their stuff, what do kids do usually? Maybe not yours. What do they do usually? They throw up. Tantrum. And they do it in the most public of places, don't they? Walmart, restaurants, Myers, wherever there's lots of people. Because when you're at home, you can lock them in the room, right? And say, hey, don't come out. But they throw a tantrum. And folks, sometimes we do the same thing. But we do it in a more sophisticated way, right? Maybe not you. So how do you know if your stuff is Lord of your life? I wrestled with that question for a couple hours. How do you know if your stuff is the Lord of your life? My answer, I believe, when you sense that you're entitled to more. Don't we live in America and we're taught we're entitled to more. Because, in our Constitution, we have the right to pursue happiness. And happiness, to some people, is having more stuff. And when we don't have stuff, we can't be happy, right? When you can give your stuff, resources freely, you are recognizing, get this, when you can give of your resources freely, you are recognizing that He is truly Lord of your life. And you're just a steward of what you own. Secondly, giving matters because we are blessed when we give. If you look at Acts 20:35, Acts 25 says, and this is the words of Jesus, it is more blessed to give than to receive. These are Jesus' words. And Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 16:2 that you can only give what you got. And he said on the first day of each week, you should put aside a portion of the money you have earned. You can only give what you got. You can't give what you don't have. And a lot of people said, I would only give more if I had more. And I usually ask, are you giving now? Boy, you need to start somewhere. And he gives us a guideline. Boy, 10% is just a starting point. But on the first day, Paul said, here's the plan. On the first day of each week, you should put aside a portion of the money you have earned. There needs to be a plan to give. And like that video would have showed you, it's not rocket science. If you don't have a plan, then you will more than likely not give. Do you know that? If you don't have a plan, you will more than likely not do anything. Not just in giving an offering or giving a tithe. If you don't have a plan, you usually, most people, if you don't have a plan, you have nothing to carry out. Paul's saying, hey, have a plan. And then carry it out. Because Jesus says, because when you don't give, you miss the opportunity to be blessed. And parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, all of you in here, we know the stuff we buy our children and grandchildren, our nieces and our nephews at birthday parties and Christmases and Easter is only stuff. We know that, right? It's only stuff. Well, why do we do it if it's only stuff? You know the answer. Because who does it bring more joy to? You, right? Not them. Because in 2 weeks, they know it's going to be collecting dust in the corner somewhere or lost underneath the couch and found a year later. We know it's not about the stuff. It's about the joy that we get in giving the stuff. Isn't that right, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles? Isn't that right? Because we know, what really do our kids need? They need food and clothes and a roof over their head and a bottle of water. And they'll be good. The rest of the stuff we give generously to them because it brings us a joy, does it not? At least it does to me. It brings us a joy. A joy that cannot be described, nor can it be written down, because, they are, the joy of our life. So if they are the joy of our life, we give generously to them, and we think nothing of it. Oh, we can look for a sale. We don't want to pay the full price. But it brings us a joy. And we are the ones who are blessed because we see the excitement in their eye. We see the joy in their faith. And it makes our hearts swell up. And because we know we did the right thing, and when we walk away from, birthdays or Easter or Christmas, or if you celebrate Flag Day and buy flags for your kids, you know what joy it brings you. We are the one who is blessed. And we know when those important dates happen, right? And what do? We plan accordingly. Miss a birthday party for your kid. See what happens. They know. I dare you not to buy anybody Christmas presents, especially those you love. Because if we don't, we miss, number one, we miss the joy of giving something. But number two, we know that, boy, when we give, we don't get to see the excitement in their eyes. We don't get to see the joy there. We don't get to see anything. We don't get to experience it at all. So Jesus makes a big deal about this. Say, hey, when you give, you will be blessed. And Paul gave us a plan. He said on the first day of each week. Well, let me go back. On the first day of each week. Folks, the first day of each week is Sunday. Imagine that. You should each put aside a portion of your money you have earned. And all through Scriptures defines a portion, at least as a tithe, or what kind of portion I'm talking about, 10%. But Paul gives us a plan. On the first day of each week, set aside a portion. Well, next, giving matters because when you freely give, you receive freely from God. And Jesus is speaking in Luke 6:38 here. He said, give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Whoa. This is Jesus speaking. This is not Pastor Tom saying, hey, this is the way it happened. This is Jesus, the one we follow. And Proverbs 11:24 says, give freely and become more wealthy. Be stingy and lose everything. Jesus says, give and you will receive. Give freely and you become more wealthy. To help us with this, watch this little clip here.
This is nice.
I know. Great gas mileage, and it's fun to drive.
But that means great gas mileage or being fun to drive.
Yeah. Doing something being loud or clear.
We need to slap the slippery fish right in the gill hole. Every time feedback, frog face, submit that.
That's weird. I like and better.
Yeah.
And is better. Those are the greatest commercials, I think, on TV right now, which a lot of us will be doing tonight. And is better. Everyone knows and is better. And as we learned last week, the generosity of the first century church changed the world and history. Changed the world and history. They took care of the pagans who were abandoned and left to die, and they gave freely of their resources to others. And folks, and means going the extra mile. And means giving the extra dollar. We go the extra mile and we give the extra dollar because God is generous towards us. God's generosity towards us has changed us. God's generosity towards us has changed us. God loves us, and what? God loves us, and what? He sent his son. He doesn't say, I love you. He says, I love you, and I am sending my son. God freely gives to us and will not let those who believe in him perish. And in return, this is what he says to us. He tells us to go the first and what? Second mile. He says not only to love your neighbor and love your enemies. Then Matthew, or through the Gospels, read it. He tells us to give up everything, and you will get everything you need back. Because God knows when we do the and, you will receive an and back. I think that's powerful. Thank you for it. You know? Because God knows when we do the and, you will receive an and back. And the last thing here, giving matters because we need to do it. Because, folks, we are part of something much bigger. You know, all throughout Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, you know, you read about giving and sacrifice and generosity and sharing and kindness and being kind to others and looking to the interest of others and sharing with one another. But a lot of times we read through the Gospels and all we look at is the sin and the way people are living their lives. But if you read the whole Gospel and you read it in all of it, there's more stories about, you know, being sacrificing yourself and giving and sharing and kindness than there is, you know, about our sins and falling short. Because this is really important. God, throughout Scripture, talks about these things of giving sacrifice, the things I just listed. And last week we looked at the first century church and how it was known for its generosity with all of the resources. You see, giving to others matters, and giving to the church matters. And I asked this week myself, you know, why did it matter so much to them? Why did it matter so much to them? Folks, they were being persecuted and abused and, you know, cut in half and hung on crosses and hung upside down on crosses, and they were laughed at and mocked and abused. And why did they still continue to give? Come on, what were they giving to? They were giving to something that was radically changing the world. And people were upset about it. And so they were the only way they could deal with it was to kill them. But the people who followed them kept giving and kept giving. And here we sit here in 2014, still sitting here. Because people gave generously. Not just in the 21st century, but in the 20th, 19th, 18th, and you go on down. People have given generously. Millions of people have given generously of their lives and their resources and all of these things. Why do they do that? And I'm convinced why they did it is because they knew they were a part of something much bigger than themselves. They knew they were part of a much bigger story. They knew the story was not about them. They knew they were the only part of the story. And what they gave to keep the story alive really mattered. Do you know when you give, you are keeping the story alive? Does that excite your heart? It does mine. But when you give, whether it be 10% or more, When you give, you are investing in people who don't know Christ yet. People did it the first 21 centuries. And folks, we don't even have to suffer much. And like in the first century church, they knew they were a part of something much bigger than themselves. And if we're honest, there's a lot of people, a lot of followers of Christ who can't get past themselves. And they can't see or understand they're part of something much bigger. I know you are part of something much bigger. And it is changing the world. And do you want to be a part of that? Is the real question. I believe giving matters. It still matters today. And we need to give because when we give, we are playing our part in keeping God's story moving forward and changing lives. You know, people invested themselves in me. You know? And it was because of the resources of other people. You know? The same is true. Everyone before you, the millions before you, have understood they are part of something much bigger. It's just not about First Church of God on 450th Street, Marion, Indiana, or about your home address. It's about something much bigger than probably what we can imagine. And so when you give an offering, or when you give a tithe, you're not giving to keep the church going. Just so you know, we need to get rid of that mentality, please. You're not giving to the church to keep it going. And I'm not here just to keep it going. Just keeping a church going is a waste of time and energy and resources. Let's get rid of that myth in our head. We don't give just to keep a church going. We don't give just to pay a pastor and part-time staff. We don't, those things, that's where the money goes. But we don't give, we see a much bigger picture, and that we know that when we give, we are part of something much bigger than ourselves. Because God placed this church here for a reason. There's the reason. That's the reason why we're here. That's what you're investing in. Just know you're a part of something bigger. You are giving to make more and better disciples, and you're giving to see lives transformed. And folks, I don't know how to make that any clearer. A lot of times, those factors that play in, we give, we don't want to see the church close. Well, it's not going to close. The church is always going to exist. It'll never close. If you read the scripture, we win. But are we going to be a part of the story? And you happen to be here, the location of 450 West 50th Street, who's been called to invest in the lives of people in the community who don't know Christ yet. Do you want to be a part of that? And this morning, this is going to be your response right here. We'll have communion as well. But Jake, is Jake still? Jake, come up here. And Natalie, could you help me too on this side? Can you help me over here? I'll tell you in a second. Just come up here, Jake, if you would. I'm going to pass out a card, and this is Giving Matters thing here. And this is about, you don't have to sign your name. If you check the third one, if you're going to start tithing or start giving to the church for the first time, I want to know who you are, and just talk to you about it. Or if you don't want me to talk to you, It's not a requirement to put your name down. What I'm asking here is three things. Number one, I pledge to continue to give what I'm presently giving. The second thing is increase my giving because I know and is better. And the last one is join the millions before me and start giving. And I don't know, where you're at. I don't know what you give. But folks, when we do give, know that you are part of a much bigger story and a much bigger investment than me as a pastor or this building. And yes, we use this building for ministry. It has its needs, and we meet its needs as well. But if you have never given before in your life, let me challenge you this morning. This is one way to be a part of a much bigger story. And it's not just to keep the church going. It's about that banner and those words over there. So Jake and Natalie, would you pass these out? And this morning, as they pass these out, just a simple check mark. If you don't want to check anything, if you would, just bring it on up, and I'll be standing there with an offering plate. If you don't want to check anything, don't worry about it. You're not obligated. I'm not twisting arms, please. If you need to think about it and pray about it, some people do. Think about it and pray about it. If you got questions, I talked to 2 or 3 people last year after we did this and explained to them this is why we do it. And this is, So everyone take one, whether you check it or not. And you can. Let God's Spirit speak to your heart. Yes, I'm going to continue what I presently give. Or, no, I'm going to increase from 10 to 12%. Or, I'm going to start giving for the first time. If you want to check one of those lines, Mackenzie and Jordan will be with the elements. I'll be standing between them. What I'd like for you to do, I'll be holding an offering plate. And all you got to do, whether it's checked or not, whether your name is signed or not, you just drop it in the offering plate. And know that when you do that, and whatever one you check, or whatever one you want to check, just know that you're a part of a much bigger story. Part of a much bigger story. Jake, I'm sorry, Jake, can you come help me? Natalie Jordan and Mackenzie, if you'd come. There's more bread if we need it. If you would, as you come and you receive your elements, drop your paper in here. And if you would, hold on to your elements and we'll take communion together. Children are welcome to come to the table. So if you were wondering that, children are welcome to come. If you're a church, come. Well, you always wonder what you do, what you give, if it's making a difference. And it broke my heart this morning when, the kids who come here without their parents. 3 of them called me and said, "Can you come pick me up?" And I said, "Sorry, we're not running the vans this morning. It's just too dangerous to have you in a van." And they were just blank silence. Like, wow. So if you want to know what we're doing is making a difference, I get to see it more up close and personal than most of you here. But these three girls have found hope here. If it's only three, then so be it. But it's more than that, we know it. But this, not just this church, but this community, because those who have gone, those who have given generously before us, those who started this van ministry years ago, gave generously. Boy, these three girls, it just broke my heart to tell them no. But I had to, there was no choice. That's why we exist. That's why we exist, if it's just for those three girls. Actually, there was more. There was about 6 or 7 of them that we could have picked up this morning. But that's who we are investing in. And like I say, boy, it's not about keeping this church, letting this church just existing. It's about investing ourselves in the community, just like Jesus invested into his disciples. They had no idea there'd be a Church of God in Marion, Indiana. Because it wasn't about the Church of God in Marion, Indiana. It was about introducing Christ to someone who didn't know. And on that night Jesus was betrayed. He took his body and he broke it. And he said, "Take and eat and do this in remembrance of me." And then he took a cup. He said, "This is my blood that was shed for you. Take and drink and do this in remembrance of me." Let's pray.